In the glittering penthouse, the lights had just flickered back on after the storm, casting harsh shadows across imported marble and designer furniture worth more than most people earned in a year. Vivian Sterling stood before an uncut birthday cake, 3 tiers of elaborate fondant work that nobody would ever taste. No guests, no well wishes, no champagne toasts or carefully crafted speeches. Just the sound of rain drumming against floor-to-ceiling windows and the electric hum of a building coming back to life. Carter Hayes, the electrician and single father, pulled his tool bag over his shoulder, ready to leave this place and return to the small, warm world where he belonged. But then Vivian suddenly lunged forward, gripping his sleeve like a woman afraid of falling off a cliff, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling. "Don't go." Her eyes were red, the kind of red that came from holding back tears for hours. "It's my birthday. You're the only one who came. Stay with me, please." Carter Hayes had never planned to be in a place like this. At 36, he'd built a quiet life from the rubble of a tragedy most people couldn't imagine surviving. He worked contract maintenance jobs, electrical repairs mostly. The kind of work that kept the lights on without asking questions or demanding explanations. His apartment was small, functional, clean in the way that spoke of careful hands and limited resources, but also of dignity. There were no framed degrees on the wall, no accolades gathering dust on shelves, just a school calendar magnetized to the fridge with Bonnie's test dates circled in red marker, and a worn sofa where he helped his daughter with homework every night. Their heads bent together over math problems and spelling words. Bonnie Hayes was 7 years old, sharp as a tack, with eyes that seemed to read people the way her father read circuit diagrams with precision and understanding beyond her years. She noticed everything, the kind of observant that made adults uncomfortable when they realized a child could see through their polite lies. When her teacher asked too many questions about why her father always picked her up alone, why there was never a mother at parent conferences or school plays, Bonnie would say simply, without drama or self-pity, "My mom's in heaven." She didn't remember Adelaide. Not really. Couldn't recall her voice or her laugh or the way she used to braid hair. But she understood the shape of the absence, the way her father's jaw tightened when other kids talked about Mother's Day, the way he kept one photograph on the mantle but never talked about it unless Bonnie asked. Carter's greatest fear wasn't poverty. It wasn't the unpredictable hours or the patched jackets or the second-hand furniture. It was entanglement. Rich people, powerful people. They lived in a world where nothing came without strings, where favors turned into leashes and kindness was always transactional. He'd learned that the hard way. Getting pulled into their orbit meant exposing Bonnie to instability, to questions, to the kind of scrutiny that could crack open everything he'd worked so hard to protect. But there was something else. Something Bonnie didn't know in Carter's tool bag, tucked beneath the voltage meter and wire strippers, was an old ID badge, faded, laminated, the kind issued to engineers, not electricians. He never showed it to anyone. It was just a reminder of who he used to be before the night everything burned down. His wife Adelaide had died in what the police called an accident, a series of equipment failures, faulty wiring in their apartment building, carbon monoxide from a malfunctioning furnace. It happened during the months when Carter was fighting to clear his name, when he was too consumed by legal battles to notice the dangers closing in on his own home. He'd never forgiven himself. He believed, deep in his bones, that it wasn't random. It was connected to the fire, to the people who needed someone to blame. to the system that crushed anyone who dared to point fingers upward. Vivian Sterling, on the other hand, lived in a world most people only glimpsed through magazine spreads and business headlines. She was CEO of Sterling Industries, a conglomerate so vast that its quarterly earnings could fund small nations. The public knew her as Ice, precision incarnate, a woman who wore power like a tailored suit and never, ever smiled in photographs. But the truth was more complicated. Vivian hated birthdays. Every year. The date dragged her back to one specific night. The night the candles went out and never came back on. She was 18 then, standing in a ballroom filled with the city's elite, celebrating a milestone she didn't want. The electrical system failed. Fire suppression didn't engage. Smoke filled the halls. And when the chaos cleared, Matilda was gone. Matilda. The name still made Vivian's chest tighten. Not a sister by blood, but something closer. A girl who'd grown up in Vivian's shadow, who'd looked at her like she hung the moon. Matilda had been 12 years old, bright-eyed and laughing, until the night she wasn't. Vivian built her empire on the ashes of that night. She convinced herself that control was the antidote to grief, that if she could master every variable, every risk, every human element, she'd never lose anyone again. But control required distance, and distance required walls, so she became untouchable, unreachable, a billionaire who commanded boardrooms but couldn't fill a dinner table. The board of directors at Sterling Industries was not a collection of allies. Chairman Otis and legal advisor Bernice held reins. Vivian couldn't see but always felt. They had files, old ones, documents that tied back to that 18th birthday, to the investigation that followed, to the settlements paid quietly to avoid scandal. They reminded her, in polite corporate language, that her position was conditional, that if she stepped out of line, the files would surface, that the empire she thought she commanded was really just a cage with velvet bars. Ingrid, the PR director, cared about optics more than people. Elias, head of security, followed protocol like scripture. Henry, the internal lawyer, understood the law but lacked the spine to wield it. They orbited Vivian. But none of them knew her. None of them stayed past business hours. None of them would ever show up to a birthday party. And then there was Corbin, the rival billionaire who'd been circling Sterling Industries like a shark smelling blood. He wanted the company, not for its value, but for the satisfaction of taking it from Vivian. He'd spent years building leverage, buying shares through shell corporations, planting informants, waiting for the perfect scandal to force a hostile Paisil takeover. The storm that night was historic. Power grids across the city buckled. Emergency services were overwhelmed. Vivian had dismissed her entire staff hours earlier, a deliberate choice. She told Ingrid she wanted one birthday without performance, without the hollow applause of people paid to care. She wanted to see what it felt like to be alone on purpose, instead of alone by accident. But the backup generator in her penthouse malfunctioned. The lights died. The heating stopped. And suddenly, the silence she'd craved felt less like peace and more like a tomb. Ingrid, ever efficient, called an emergency service. Send someone immediately. VIP client. The dispatcher didn't ask questions. Carter took the job because he needed the money. Bonnie's school had sent another tuition reminder. Politely worded but unmistakably firm. The babysitter canceled at the last minute. Her own kids sick with flu. And Carter had no backup plan. So he did what he always did. He packed an extra jacket, filled a thermos with hot chocolate, and brought Bonnie along. She sat in the hallway of the penthouse building, backpack on her lap, small and patient in the way that broke Carter's heart. Through the crack in the door, she could see the birthday cake, tall and untouched, candles unlit, sitting on a marble counter like a monument to nothing. Vivian saw the child first. She'd been pacing, trying to ignore the silence. When she glanced toward the hallway and locked eyes with Bonnie, the girl didn't look away. She just stared, curious and unafraid. And something in Vivian's chest cracked. Those eyes, that expression. It was Matilda all over again. Carter worked with the kind of precision that didn't match his job title. He didn't just reconnect wires. He diagnosed the system like an engineer, checking load distribution, inspecting the transfer switch, testing capacitors, reviewing error logs on the control panel. He moved through the circuits like someone who understood not just how things worked, but why they failed. Vivian watched him from the doorway, fascinated. Most people cowered in her presence, stumbled over words, tried too hard to impress. Carter didn't even glance her way. He was focused, methodical, unimpressed by the marble floors and designer furniture. To him, this was just another job, another broken system in need of repair. When the lights finally came back on, the digital clock blinked past midnight. Officially. It was no longer her birthday. Vivian stared at the cake, at the empty chairs, at the floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting a woman standing alone in a palace built for crowds. The mask she wore so carefully, the one that made board members flinch and competitors retreat. It slipped, just for a moment. Carter picked up his tool bag, checked on Bonnie, and turned toward the door. That's when Vivian moved, not with the calculated grace she used in business, but with something raw and desperate. She crossed the room in 3 steps and grabbed his sleeve, fingers tight like someone gripping a ledge. "Don't go." Carter stopped, looked at her. Really looked. Maybe for the first time. Her voice cracked. "It's my birthday. You're the only one who came. Stay with me. Please." It wasn't a command. It wasn't manipulation. It was the sound of someone who'd run out of ways to pretend they were okay. By the next morning, the consequences had already begun. Elias reviewed the security footage from the hallway. The cameras had captured Vivian standing close to Carter, her hand on his arm, the angle just ambiguous enough to suggest intimacy where there was none. It didn't matter that nothing happened. The optics were damaging. Finn, the investigative journalist who specialized in financial elite scandals, received an anonymous tip. Powerful CEO spends night with working-class electrician. The message included timestamps, the building address, and a blurry still from the security feed. Corbin's fingerprints were all over it, though no one could prove it. Ingrid was livid. "If this hits the press, the stock will tank. Shareholders will demand answers. We need to control the narrative." She ordered Elias to identify Carter, run a background check, and handle it discreetly. Translation: find leverage, apply pressure, make the problem disappear. Otis and Bernice convened an emergency meeting. They saw opportunity where Ingrid saw crisis. Carter was a weakness, a crack in Vivian's armor. If they could weaponize him, they could force her compliance on the upcoming merger deal. the one she'd been resisting for months. Carter went home that morning feeling uneasy. Bonnie, oblivious to the tension, chattered about the lonely cake lady all through breakfast. She didn't understand why her father seemed so distracted, why he kept checking his phone, why he told her not to mention the penthouse to anyone at school. Carter reminded himself of his cardinal rule. Don't get involved with rich people's problems. Don't let their chaos bleed into Bonnie's life. Stay small. Stay safe. Stay invisible. When a courier arrived that afternoon with an envelope, Carter almost didn't open it. Inside was a thank you note, handwritten on expensive stationery, and a check for $5,000. He stared at it for a long time. Then he wrote a single word on a piece of notebook paper, sealed it in an envelope, and sent it back. No. Vivian received the rejection in her office. She'd been preparing for a board meeting, reviewing projections, fortifying herself for another round of passive-aggressive power plays. When her assistant handed her Carter's response, she stopped. No one said no to her. Not like this. Not without explanation or negotiation. Just a flat, unadorned refusal, for the first time in years. Vivian felt something other than control or emptiness. She felt curious. Over the next week, Vivian did something she hadn't done in a decade. She left the tower. No driver, no security detail, just a borrowed car and directions to Carter's address. She wore jeans and a plain jacket, the kind of anonymous outfit that made her invisible. She found the apartment building easily enough. Small, clean, tired in the way that came from age, not neglect. She watched through the lobby window as Carter helped Bonnie with her homework at a kitchen table, the light above them flickering slightly. The kind of flicker he probably planned to fix once he had time. Bonnie's laughter carried through the glass. Carter smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that transformed his whole face. Vivian realized, standing there in the cold, that she didn't know what real looked like anymore. Everything in her world was performance, but this small moment of a father and daughter navigating fractions together, this was real. She knocked. Carter opened the door, saw her, and his expression shifted from surprise to wariness. "I wanted to thank you properly," Vivian said. "Not with money, just thank you." Bonnie peeked around her father's leg, eyes bright. "It's the cake lady." Vivian offered a compromise, a legitimate contract, not charity. Sterling Industries ran a charitable foundation that needed facility maintenance, electrical work, safety inspections. The pay was fair, the terms clear, everything documented and professional. Carter hesitated. He didn't trust it. But Bonnie needed stability. The school costs were climbing. The apartment's wiring was outdated, potentially dangerous. He could keep saying no out of pride, or he could say yes for his daughter's future. He agreed. On one condition, everything in writing. No favors, no backdoor deals, no strings. Vivian nodded. Deal. That evening, Bonnie made something in her room. She emerged an hour later with a handmade birthday card, folded construction paper with crayon drawings of candles and lopsided letters that spelled "Happy Late Birthday." She handed it to Vivian with the solemnity of someone presenting a crown jewel. Vivian took it. Her hands shook. It was the first real gift she'd received in longer than she could remember. Not corporate flowers or strategic wine baskets, but something made with thought, with care, with the assumption that she mattered. She looked at Carter. He was watching his daughter. Pride and protectiveness written across his face. For a moment, Vivian understood what she'd been missing. Not power, not control. Just this. Connection that didn't require contracts or cameras or carefully managed images. But the world Vivian lived in didn't allow for simple things. Corbin accelerated his plan. If a rumor couldn't destroy Vivian's credibility, maybe a crime could. He orchestrated an electrical failure at one of Sterling Industries' key facilities, a distribution center that supplied medical equipment to hospitals across 3 states. The sabotage was sophisticated, designed to look like negligence, and the technical signature matched Carter's repair methodology. Ingrid faced mounting pressure from the board and the press. Shareholders were jittery. The media was asking questions. She needed a scapegoat, and Carter was convenient. She started to believe that maybe he was using Vivian, that maybe the whole thing was a setup to extract money from a vulnerable woman. Otis issued an ultimatum. Terminate the contract with Hayes. Publicly distance yourself, or we'll do it for you, and the fallout will be worse. At the same time, Carter started noticing things. A car that seemed to follow him home, hang-up calls. And then, the letter from Bonnie's school. An anonymous complaint had been filed, questioning his fitness as a parent, citing unstable employment and questionable associations. Carter felt ice spread through his chest. They were going after Bonnie. His nightmare scenario. The one thing he couldn't defend against alone. A man approached him outside the school. Nondescript. Forgettable. Walk away from Vivian Sterling. Forget you ever met her. Or the complaints get worse. You could lose custody. We both know you can't afford a legal fight. That night, Carter couldn't sleep. He stood at Bonnie's bedroom door, watching her breathe, small and peaceful under her blanket. He'd do anything to protect her. Anything. Even disappear. Vivian learned about the threats through Elias, who'd been digging into the anonymous tip that started everything. The trail led back to Corbin. Though the evidence was circumstantial, Vivian wanted to help Carter, wanted to use her resources to crush whoever was threatening him. But she was afraid. Afraid that her involvement would make it worse. That the spotlight she carried would burn Carter and Bonnie alive, for the first time in her adult life. Vivian didn't know what to do. Bernice delivered the final blow. She walked into Vivian's office late one evening. Carrying a folder Vivian recognized immediately. The old files. The ones from the 18th birthday. Just a reminder, Bernice said, her voice pleasant and poisonous. Of who really holds the cards here. She left the folder on the desk and walked out. Vivian opened it with shaking hands, the expensive paper crackling in the silence of her office. Inside were incident reports typed on old letterhead, witness statements collected in the chaotic aftermath, technical analyses written in the dry language of engineers trying to explain catastrophic failure, and insurance settlements negotiated behind closed doors. The fire, the evacuation failures that turned corridors into death traps, Matilda's death certificate. Official and final and unbearable to look at, even after all these years, and buried in the engineering assessment, in a footnote that someone had tried very hard to make forgettable, was a name she hadn't seen in years, but now burned itself into her vision. Carter Hayes, junior electrical engineer, issued formal written warnings regarding critical system failures in facility electrical infrastructure. Recommendations submitted to supervising contractors and facility management team. all recommendations ignored due to budget constraints and timeline pressures. Employee subsequently terminated for insubordination and attempting to file reports with external regulatory agencies. Professional credentials suspended. Name added to industry blacklist. Vivian stopped breathing. The words blurred. She read them again, then a third time, each pass making the truth more inescapable and more horrific. Vivian stopped breathing. The investigator who'd handled the case had noted that Hayes had been made the scapegoat to protect higher-level contractors and facility managers. The real blame lay with corners cut during construction, with inspectors bribed to sign off on substandard work, with a chain of decisions that prioritized profit over safety. Carter had tried to stop it, and they'd destroyed him for it. Vivian sat in the dark, the folder open in front of her, and realized the full weight of what she'd done. Not intentionally, not directly, but her family's event, her birthday, had been the catalyst for Carter's ruin, for Adelaide's death, for everything he'd lost. She found him the next morning at a coffee shop near his apartment. He was waiting for Bonnie's school bus, nursing a cup that had gone cold. "I know who you are," Vivian said quietly, sliding into the seat across from him. Carter looked up, saw the folder, understood. "That was you, 18 years ago. The Sterling estate fire." He didn't deny it. "I warned them. Nobody listened." Vivian's voice broke. "Matilda died that night. She was 12. Carter's expression shifted, pain mixing with old anger. "And my wife died 2 years later, while I was fighting to clear my name. While I was too broke and too distracted to notice the wiring in our apartment was faulty. While I was so buried in legal battles that I couldn't protect my own family." They sat in silence. The weight of shared grief, of tangled fates, settled between them. "I didn't come here for revenge," Carter said finally. "I came to your penthouse because I needed the money. I stayed because Bonnie likes you. But I can't let this world, your world, destroy what's left of my life. I'm out. I'm taking the contract termination. I'm leaving." "Don't," Vivian said. Carter stood. "I have to." "Then they win. Corbin, Otis, everyone who's been using us as pieces on their board. They win." Carter looked at her. Really looked. "What do you want from me?" "The truth. That's all. I'll take the consequences. I'll lose the company, the reputation, everything. But I need you to tell the truth about what happened. Not for me. For Matilda. For Adelaide. For everyone they silenced." Vivian made a choice that night. She would stand with Carter, publicly, and let the pieces fall where they would. But she needed a strategy. She pulled Henry, the internal lawyer, into her confidence. He was scared, but he was also decent. Together. They built a case not just against Corbin, but against the entire system that had enabled the cover-up. Elias, surprisingly, offered his help. "I follow the rules," he said. "But I don't follow cowards. If you're really doing this, I'm in." Finn, the journalist, received an unusual message, an invitation to an exclusive interview, off the record, with someone who had information about the Sterling estate fire. He took the bait. The plan was risky. Corbin had to be drawn out, made to confess his involvement, and the only way to do that was to make him think he'd already won. Henry arranged a meeting, ostensibly for Carter to sign a non-disclosure agreement and accept a settlement in exchange for his silence. Corbin, smelling blood, insisted on attending personally, unable to resist the chance to watch Vivian's downfall firsthand. The meeting took place in a neutral conference room. Carter sat across from Corbin, Bernice, and Otis. Vivian was conspicuously absent, supposedly too ashamed to face the situation. Corbin slid the paperwork across the table. Sign this. Take the money. Take the tsuon. Disappear. Everyone wins. Carter picked up the pen, hesitated. You really orchestrated all of this, didn't you? Carter said. The electrical failure at the facility, the anonymous complaints about my daughter, just to hurt Vivian. Corbin smiled. I orchestrated nothing. I simply facilitated consequences. Vivian should have been more careful about who she associates with. And 18 years ago, the fire... Otis stiffened. That's not relevant to this discussion. It's completely relevant, Carter said. Because you were on the board then too, weren't you? You knew the facility wasn't up to code. You knew the electrical systems were compromised. And when I reported it, you had me fired and blacklisted to protect the construction contracts. Bernice stood. This meeting is over. Is it? Carter gestured to the corner of the room, where a security camera blinked silently. Elias had installed it 2 days earlier. Fully legal, fully documented. Corbin's smile vanished. The recording captured everything. The implicit admission, the threats, the conspiracy to suppress evidence and destroy anyone who challenged the narrative. Finn published the story the next day. Not a sensational hit piece, but a carefully researched investigation that laid out the connections between the original fire, the cover-up, the ongoing intimidation, and Corbin's attempt to weaponize tragedy for a corporate takeover. The shareholder meeting was chaos. Otis and Bernice scrambled to distance themselves. Corbin faced immediate legal action, both civil and criminal. George, the detective who'd been quietly reviewing the old case files at Vivian's request, announced a formal reinvestigation into the Sterling estate fire and the subsequent accidents that had claimed Adelaide's life. Vivian stood at the podium, facing a room full of investors, journalists, and lawyers. She did something no CEO in her position was supposed to do. She told the truth. 18 years ago, a young girl named Matilda died at an event my family hosted. The systems that should have protected her failed because people in power chose profit over safety. A good engineer named Carter Hayes tried to prevent it and was destroyed for speaking up. I'm standing here today because I refuse to let that pattern continue. I'm releasing all internal files related to the incident. I'm establishing an independent oversight committee, and I'm stepping down as CEO, effective immediately. The room erupted, but Vivian wasn't finished. I'm also establishing a foundation in Matilda's name, dedicated to electrical safety standards and whistleblower protections. Carter Hayes will serve as its technical director, and anyone who has a problem with that can sue me personally. I'll be easy to find. She walked off the stage. No bodyguards, no prepared exit. Just a woman who'd finally stopped running from the truth. The cost was real. Vivian lost the CEO position. Her reputation took hits from every direction. Some people called her brave. Others called her reckless. But she was free. For the first time since her 18th birthday. She was free. Carter was cleared, publicly and completely. His engineering credentials were reinstated. Job offers poured in. But he took the position with Vivian's foundation because it mattered, because it meant something. 6 months later, on Vivian's birthday, there was no penthouse, no marble counters or designer cakes, just a small apartment, warm and lived in, filled with the smell of homemade dinner. Bonnie had insisted on baking the cake herself. It was lopsided, the frosting uneven, the candles stuck in at odd angles. It was perfect. Vivian stood in the doorway, hesitant. "I don't want to intrude. I know you have your own traditions." Bonnie grabbed her hand. "Don't go. It's your birthday. You're supposed to be here." Carter met Vivian's eyes across the small kitchen. The wariness had softened, not gone, but softened. "If you want to stay, you can stay." Vivian sat down. Bonnie lit the candles with solemn concentration. They sang off-key. The cake was too sweet and slightly burnt on one side. It was the best birthday Vivian had ever had. Later, after Bonnie had gone to bed, Carter and Vivian stood on the small balcony, looking out at the city lights. "Thank you," Vivian said, "for giving me a chance to make this right." Carter was quiet for a long moment. Adelaide used to say that the hardest thing about losing someone isn't the grief. It's wondering if you'll ever feel whole again, if you'll ever find people who see the broken parts and don't walk away. "You didn't walk away," Vivian said. "Neither did you." They stood together in the cold. Two people who'd been hollowed out by the same chain of tragedies, who'd found each other in the wreckage and chose, against all odds, to stay. The foundation launched 3 months later. Carter trained a team of young engineers, teaching them not just how to fix systems, but how to stand up when something was wrong. Vivian worked quietly behind the scenes, leveraging her remaining connections to push for legislation, to fund research, to make sure Matilda's death and Adelaide's death meant something. Bonnie started calling Vivian by her first name instead of the cake lady. Small victories. The world didn't transform overnight. Corbyn's trial dragged on. Some board members at Sterling Industries escaped consequences through legal maneuvering. Injustice didn't evaporate just because two people decided to fight it. But something had changed. Something small and stubborn and real. On the anniversary of the fire, Vivian and Carter visited Matilda's grave together. They didn't bring flowers. They brought a framed photograph of the foundation's first graduating class. Young engineers holding certificates, smiling. "She would have liked this," Vivian said. Carter nodded. "Adelaide, too." They stood in the quiet, honoring the dead by refusing to let their deaths be meaningless. Months turned into a year. The foundation grew. Carter's apartment became a gathering place, cramped and chaotic, filled with the kind of noise that comes from people who've chosen to be there. Bonnie thrived, her sharp eyes and sharper question finding a safe place to exist. Vivian learned how to be part of something instead of in control of everything. She learned how to sit at a dinner table without analyzing power dynamics. She learned how to laugh at Bonnie's terrible jokes, and how to help with homework, and how to exist in a space where vulnerability wasn't weakness. And Carter learned, slowly, that not everyone with money was a threat, that some walls could come down without the whole structure collapsing. One evening, Bonnie asked a question that had been brewing for months. "Are you and Dad going to get married?" Vivian choked on her coffee. Carter froze mid-sentence. Bonnie looked between them, utterly serious. "Because if you are, I need to know. I'm supposed to be the flower girl, and I need to practice. They didn't have an answer. Not yet. But the question wasn't scary anymore. It was just another possibility in a future that had stopped feeling predetermined. On Vivian's next birthday. They were ready, no surprises, no grand gestures. Just the three of them and a cake that Bonnie insisted on decorating with far too many candles. "Make a wish," Bonnie commanded. Vivian looked at the small, imperfect family gathered around her kitchen table. Carter, who'd survived hell and chose forgiveness over bitterness. Bonnie, who'd turned loneliness into an invitation. She closed her eyes, but she didn't wish for anything. She already had what she needed. And when Carter said, quietly, "You don't have to leave if you don't want to," Vivian understood that the words meant something different now, not a plea born from desperation, but a choice. To build something new from the ashes of what they'd lost. To honor the dead by living fully. To stay when it would be easier to go. Vivian smiled. "I'm not going anywhere." Bonnie clapped her hands. The candles flickered. And in that small, warm room, three people who'd been broken by the same cruel machinery of power and silence chose each other. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Because some of the best things in life aren't built on contracts or carefully managed images or strategic alliances. They're built on a simple truth. Stay. When everything says go. When the world makes it easier to walk away. When staying means facing hard truths and harder consequences. Stay anyway. That's where healing begins.